Jimmy Stewart was about to make a promise that would haunt him for 30 years. He just didn't know it yet. Penn Station, at midnight. A woman with a sleeping boy in her arms was counting coins with shaking hands. 8 quarters, 3 dimes, a handful of pennies. And Jimmy was reaching for his wallet, about to destroy his own peace of mind forever. The ticket window clerk was getting impatient. "Lady, you need $12 more or you can't get on that train." "Please," she whispered. "My sister is expecting us in Pittsburgh. My husband was killed in France, and—" Next. The clerk slammed his window shut. That's when Jimmy Stewart made the choice. Not just to help, that was easy. The choice that would cost him everything. The choice to become a ghost in his family's life. To carry a secret so heavy it would change who he was forever. But the woman counting pennies had no idea she was about to be saved by a man who would spend 3 decades wondering if he'd done the right thing. And Jimmy had no idea that one moment of compassion was about to become a lifetime of beautiful torment. To understand what happened next, you need to understand what Jimmy Stewart carried home from the war. It wasn't just the medals. It was guilt. Why him? Why did he get to come home when better men died? Every morning he woke up rich and famous, while Gold Star mothers hung flags in their windows. The envelope in his pocket contained his first paycheck from It's a Wonderful Life. More money than most Americans made in 10 years. But looking at this woman counting pennies, Jimmy felt like a fraud. All those movies about heroes, and here was real heroism. A mother holding her family together with $8 and determination. The math was simple. He had everything. She had nothing. And everybody else, the businessmen, the tourists, the train conductors, were all pretending not to see. He walked over to the bench. "Excuse me, ma'am. Are you waiting for someone?" The woman looked up. Her eyes were red from crying, but she managed a polite smile. "Oh, yes. Well, no. We're supposed to be on the 4:15 to Pittsburgh. That train left 20 minutes ago," Jimmy said gently. The boy tugged harder at his mother's sleeve. "Mama, I'm hungry." The woman's composure cracked just slightly. "I know, sweetheart. We'll figure something out." Jimmy Stewart sat down on the bench. Not too close, not intrusive, just close enough to matter. "I'm Jimmy," he said to the boy. "I'm Bobby. This is my mama, Mrs. Henderson." "Mrs. Henderson." Jimmy nodded. "Traveling to Pittsburgh?" She hesitated. "In 1947, you didn't tell your troubles to strangers." But something about this tall, gentle man made her feel safe. "My husband, he was killed in France. Last month. We're going to stay with my sister until I can find work." But here's the part that would have shocked anyone who knew Jimmy Stewart. The part that makes this story more than just a celebrity charity case. He wasn't just sending money. He was living a double life. Mrs. Henderson had exactly $8.37 to her name. Her sister in Pittsburgh had written one letter, a cold, reluctant invitation that made it clear they weren't really welcome. And little Bobby had been asking for 3 days when Daddy was coming home. Jimmy looked at this woman trying to hold her world together with $8 and pride, and he made a promise, not out loud, not to her, but to himself. A promise that would cost him more than money. It would cost him something harder to give, his anonymity. "The next train to Pittsburgh leaves at 6 a.m., he said. "Do you have somewhere to stay?" Mrs. Henderson's silence told him everything. Jimmy looked around the station. Hundreds of people rushing past. Security guards who saw nothing. Cleaning crews stepping around them like they were part of the furniture. This woman and her boy had become invisible in a crowd of Americans who'd fought a war for freedom and justice. Jimmy Stewart reached into his coat, the envelope containing his paycheck from It's a Wonderful Life, a movie about how one man's life could matter. Here was his chance to prove it wasn't just Hollywood fantasy. "The Travelers Inn on 42nd Street has rooms," he said quietly. "Tell them Mr. Stewart sent you. They'll take care of everything." "Oh, no, I couldn't possibly." "Please." Jimmy's voice carried the weight of every mother he couldn't save during the war. "Let me do this." He handed her $40, a week's salary for most working men. "For Bobby," he said simply. But that wasn't the promise. That was just the beginning. The real promise came later, after he'd gotten them settled at the modest hotel, after he bought Bobby dinner, and listened to him talk about baseball cards and missing his father. The promise came when Jimmy looked at Mrs. Henderson and saw his own mother, who'd waited for her boy to come home from war. "I want you to give me your sister's address in Pittsburgh," he said. "Why?" "Because I'm going to make sure Bobby has what he needs to grow up right. And I'm going to make sure you never have to worry about whether there's food on the table." Mrs. Henderson started to protest, but Jimmy held up his hand. "Here's how it's going to work. Every month, you're going to receive an envelope. Inside will be enough money for rent, groceries, clothes for Bobby, and a little extra. No return address. No questions asked. But why would you?" "Because I can. And because nobody should have to raise a boy alone without help. I don't even know your last name." Jimmy smiled, that gentle smile that would make him famous in 1,000 movies. "That's probably better for both of us." What Mrs. Henderson didn't know was that Jimmy Stewart had just committed to becoming a ghost in her family's life. For 30 years, he would know Bobby's report cards before Mrs. Henderson did. Glasses in 4th grade? Paid. Baseball camp? Covered. Mrs. Henderson's hospital bills? Vanished overnight. Every envelope signed a friend. Never Jimmy Stewart. Never any return address that could lead back to Beverly Hills. But here's what nobody tells you about playing God in someone's life. It changes you. Every month, writing those checks, Jimmy had to face the same question. Was this charity or penance? Was he helping Bobby Henderson, or buying his way out of survivor's guilt? The weight of the secret grew heavier each year. By 1950, Jimmy Stewart was making millions. By 1960, he owned ranches, investments, everything a man could want. But every month, sitting at his desk writing that envelope, he felt like that frightened bomber pilot again, still trying to justify why he made it home when others didn't. In 1965, 18 years after that night in Penn Station, Jimmy got a letter that broke him down completely. "Dear Mr. A Friend," it began, "my name is Bobby Henderson, and I'm graduating valedictorian from the University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine." Jimmy had to stop reading. He walked to his window and stared at the Hollywood Hills, fighting tears. The hungry kid from the train station was going to be a doctor, but the letter continued. "I don't know who you are, but I know what you've done. I'm going to spend my life helping people, because someone once helped us when we had nothing." Jimmy folded the letter with shaking hands. 30 years of guilt, and this is what it had bought him. Not absolution. Something better. Purpose. The scared little boy had grown up to save lives. Maybe the war hadn't been for nothing after all. But the story doesn't end there. Because Bobby Henderson never stopped wondering about the mysterious benefactor who'd shaped his entire life. In 1977, 30 years after that night at Penn Station, Dr. Robert Henderson was invited to speak at a medical charity gala in Los Angeles. He was now chief of pediatric surgery at Children's Hospital of Pittsburgh, a man who dedicated his life to healing kids, just like he'd once been a kid who needed healing. The invitation came because of his work with underprivileged children. Bobby had never forgotten being that scared little boy in a train station. His medical practice included a charity wing where poor kids got the same treatment as rich kids. No questions asked. No bill sent. Sound familiar? Bobby Henderson had learned compassion from a master, even though he'd never known the teacher's name. The gala was at the Beverly Hills Hotel. Jimmy Stewart, now 70 years old and struggling with hearing loss, almost didn't attend. But his wife, Gloria, insisted. "You haven't been to a charity event in months," she said. "It'll be good for you to get out." Jimmy sat at a table near the back. He was there to write a check and leave quietly, like always. But when the keynote speaker was introduced as Dr. Robert Henderson, Jimmy's blood turned to ice. It couldn't be, could it? Dr. Henderson took the stage, and Jimmy saw him immediately. 30 years older, but the same eyes, the same gentle manner. The scared little boy from Penn Station had become a man who radiated kindness. "Ladies and gentlemen," Bobby began, "I want to tell you a story about why I became a doctor. It starts with a night in 1947 when my mother and I were stranded in Penn Station with nowhere to go and no money for food." Jimmy's hands started shaking. A stranger approached us that night, a tall, gentle man who saw our desperation and decided to do something about it. He didn't just help us that one night. He helped us for 30 years. Anonymous envelopes with enough money to live on. Medical bills that mysteriously got paid. College tuition that appeared when we needed it most. The room was completely silent. Even the waiters had stopped moving. I never knew his name. My mother called him our guardian angel. Every success in my life, every child I've been able to help, every medical breakthrough I've contributed to, all of it traces back to one man's decision to help a widow and her son when nobody else would. Jimmy tried to breathe normally, but his chest felt tight. I spent 30 years wondering who he was. I asked at our old church in Pittsburgh. I talked to neighbors from our old street. Nothing. Until last month. Bobby paused, looking out at the audience. Last month, my mother passed away at age 83. While cleaning out her things, I found a box she'd kept hidden for 30 years. The same woman who'd once counted pennies in Penn Station had saved every letter our benefactor ever sent. And in the very last letter, written just 6 months ago when my mother was dying, our mysterious friend had included something he'd never included before. Bobby reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope, a return address. Jimmy's vision blurred. He'd sent that last letter when he heard Mrs. Henderson was sick. After 30 years of careful secrecy, grief had made him slip up just once. The return address led me to a small accounting firm in Los Angeles. The accountant there led me to a man who asked me not to reveal his identity unless I was absolutely certain I wanted the world to know. Bobby looked directly at Jimmy's table. Then he pointed. "Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking the man who taught me that one person really can make a difference, Mr. Jimmy Stewart." Jimmy felt every eye in the room turned toward him. He squinted, his face a mask of embarrassment and emotion. The room erupted. Doctors, nurses, hospital administrators, and wealthy donors rose to their feet in thunderous applause. But Jimmy wasn't seeing the crowd. He was seeing Mrs. Henderson on that bench. He was seeing little Bobby asking when his daddy was coming home. Jimmy stood slowly, his legs unsteady. The applause continued for 5 full minutes. The hospital chairman was crying. The head of pediatrics was wiping her eyes. Even the tough old surgeons had tears on their faces. When the noise finally died down, Bobby Henderson, the same scared little boy who'd once tugged at his mother's sleeve in Penn Station, spoke again. "Mr. Stewart, you gave me more than money. You gave me an example. You showed me what it means to help people without expecting anything in return. Every child I've operated on, every family I've helped, they're part of your legacy, too." Jimmy walked to the stage on shaking legs. When he reached the podium, Bobby embraced him like the son he'd never had. The microphone was handed to Jimmy. The room waited. I promised your mother I'd never tell anyone," Jimmy said, his voice barely audible. "I kept that promise for 30 years. She released you from that promise, Mr. Stewart. In her final letter to you, she wrote that when she was gone, the world should know what you'd done." Jimmy looked out at the audience. Hospital directors he'd known for years, fellow actors who donated to charity events, old friends from the war. They were all staring back at him with new respect. Not for his movies, not for his fame, for something much simpler and much harder. Mrs. Henderson was wrong about one thing. Jimmy said finally, "She called me Bobby's guardian angel, but she had it backwards. Bobby was mine. Every month for 30 years. When I wrote that check, I remembered what really matters. Not the movies, not the awards, taking care of each other. The applause started again, but Jimmy held up his hand. There are people in this room tonight who have more money than they know what to do with. And there are people out there right now, sitting on benches in train stations, wondering how they're going to make it through the night. If this story means anything, it means you don't have to wait for permission to help. You just have to decide to care. Jimmy Stewart left the stage that night knowing his 30-year secret was dead. The press would have a field day. The story would be in every newspaper in America. But walking to his car in the empty parking garage, Jimmy felt something he hadn't felt in decades. Lightness. For 30 years, he'd carried the weight of that secret like a stone in his chest. Tonight, for the first time since Penn Station, he could breathe. Gloria would be waiting at home, probably reading in bed, wondering how the charity dinner went. How could he explain that 30 years of marriage? And she'd never known her husband's deepest secret. He reached into his coat pocket, the same pocket where he'd once carried an envelope to a train station, and found the car keys. As he drove home to the quiet streets of Beverly Hills, Jimmy allowed himself one small smile. Some secrets are meant to be kept. Others are meant to be shared when the time is right. 3 months later, Jimmy received a package. Inside was a medical journal with Bobby's latest article. The Henderson Foundation, Anonymous Giving in Pediatric Care. The dedication read, "To Mr. A. Friend, who taught me that heroes don't need recognition." Jimmy Stewart folded the article and put it in his desk drawer, next to 30 years of carbon copies from letters he'd never signed his name to. The circle was finally complete. And somewhere in Pittsburgh, children who would never know Jimmy Stewart's name were getting the medical care they needed, paid for by a foundation built on one man's decision to help a stranger count coins in a train station. The best secrets, Jimmy realized, are the ones that keep giving long after you're gone. Have you ever made a promise that nobody knew about? A quiet commitment that changed someone's life without them knowing who to thank? Jimmy Stewart's story reminds us that the most powerful act of kindness often happen in shadows, carried out by people who never expect credit. What would you have done in that train station? Could you have kept that secret for 30 years? And maybe more importantly, is there someone in your life right now who could use a guardian angel? Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more untold stories of quiet heroes who changed the world one person at a time. Thank you for watching.